Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I am Tanvi Taneja. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in London, Stuart Smith. Stuart, good to have you with us.
It's 11:30 a.m. in London and 12:30 p.m. across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes. Israel releases a report outlining sexual abuse by Hamas during its October 7th attack. Madrid sees anti-EU protests over agricultural policy, and Italy's a step closer to processing migrants outside EU territory. But first, back to you, Tanvi, for the headlines.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar calls for radically reforming global multilateral system to resolve contentious issues at the 9th Raisina dialogue in New Delhi. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi attends the Golden Jubilee celebration of the Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation, gives his guarantee to make Amul the world's biggest dairy company. US lawmaker Mike Gallagher on a visit to Taiwan reassures support regardless of election outcome, says need to ensure delivery of weapons to Taiwan. And Israel releases a report pointing to systematic sexual abuse of women during Hamas's October 7th attack, calls on the UN and other international bodies to address the issue. First news from New Delhi. On the second day of the 9th edition of Raisina Dialogue 2024, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has again called for radically reforming the United Nations Security Council. He was speaking on the session named A Tapestry of Truths. Can the two hemispheres agree? The panel included Foreign Minister of the Netherlands, Harke Broen Slot, Bolivia's former President, Jorge Quiroga, Diplomatic Advisor to the UAE, President Anwar bin Mohammad Gargash, and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tanzania, Janvary Yusuf Makamba. Dr. S. Jaishankar said all big issues haven't found multilateralism, though the sentiment for change is strong. Notably, there have been several calls for reforms and more balanced and responsive representation in the five-membered UNSC.
If you take the UN, when the UN was invented, it had at least about approximately 50 members. We have 4 times the members. So it's a common sense proposition that you can't continue the same way when you have 4 times the members. We use the UN very often to illustrate that point. We've also seen, if you look at the last 5 years, all the big issues, in a way, we have not been able to find multilateral solutions. So the results are also, or the lack of results demonstrate the case for reform.
Minister of Foreign Affairs and East African Cooperation of Tanzania, Janvary Yusuf Makamba, called out the double standards in application of international laws.
We don't think that the current system works for us. We see a lot of hypocrisy in the way we deal with international issues that concerns us. We see double standards in application of international law. There is tremendous mistrust in the global economic and political architecture. We know that, and people talk about rule-based order, but the two key words here are rules and order. Who makes the rule? And we think that the current setup from the beginning has been not working for us.
The Foreign Minister of Estonia is also in New Delhi for the Raisina dialogue. Showering praises on India, Margaret Schnaka said India is taking the lead globally as the largest democracy of the world.
I really like the Prime Minister Modi program, Make in India. It helps us, our small companies, relatively small companies, to scale up and also produce in India. And India is taking the lead position as the biggest democracy in the world. And at the same time, when the world is dividing because of Russian aggression and situation in Gaza, in Africa, it is very important that democracies, as we are, the European Union and India, we are keeping together. And as well, India is taking more lead to get us rid of the dependence from the China political economy.
The Raisina Dialogue is India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geoeconomics. The theme for this 9th edition of the Raisina Dialogue is Chaturanga: conflict, contest, cooperate, create. India's Minister for Railways, Communications and Information Technology, Ashwini Vaishnav, also took part in one of the sessions on Thursday. He said the growth story of India that we are seeing today is well thought out and planned ahead of time.
In last 60 years, 20,000 kilometers were electrified. Electrified basically the entire track network. Instead of running on diesel locomotives, you run it on electrical locomotives, much more cleaner, 90% less polluting, right? And in 10 years, 40,000 kilometers electrified. Imagine one of the largest networks is of Germany, that is about 35,000 kilometers. So electrifying equivalent of Germany's network in 10 years. Big task.
As developing nations push for reforms in multilateral institutions, call for global rebalancing are growing louder. DD India's Jessica Taneja spoke with Secretary of State at the Foreign Affairs Ministry of the Republic of Poland.
2 years ago, America introduced its Indo-Pacific strategy, putting India at its focus. EU soon followed suit with its own Indo-Pacific strategy, giving India that kind of importance in the region. What more can we expect from the European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy?
It's difficult for me to answer for the EU as a whole, because I do not represent the EU as a whole, and I'm not even a minister in the Polish government responsible for the EU relations. But I can say that we, on a bilateral basis, want to increase our cooperation, especially in this promising new sectors. We've created a Ministry for New Technologies, for instance, and this is something which we want to talk to India. India is a highly developed nation with innovative ideas. We have some ourselves, but we want to cooperate more on a technology front, on the research front, where we can produce something which is a cutting edge, and it's more brain to brain than physical product to physical product.
Staying in Asia, US lawmaker Mike Gallagher met with Taiwan's President-elect Lai Ching-te on Thursday and reinforced support amid Chinese threat. Speaking during a meeting with Lai and delegations from both sides, US Representative Mike Gallagher said America stands with Taiwan. Gallagher praised the recent election in Taiwan as well as Lai's rhetoric upon winning the contest. Gallagher, the chair of the House of Representatives Select Committee on China, was accompanied by 4 other lawmakers on the trip that ends on Saturday. Gallagher also met Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen, during which he said the US delegation's trip was to show bipartisan support for the island.
And in light of that, I just want to say thank you, Madam President, for not only being an incredible leader here in Taiwan, but really distinguishing yourself as a leader within the free world. And today, freedom is under attack from authoritarian aggression, and we need to be more vigilant than ever if we want to pass on this gift of freedom we've been given to the next generation.
Moving further west, an Israeli report has called out the UN and other bodies to address the systematic and deliberate sexual assaults on civilians during the Hamas's October 7th attack. My colleague Stuart Smith is in London. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Stuart, over to you now.
Thanks, Tanvi. Israel says it intensified its military operations while scanning southern Gaza to evacuate more hostages. In Jerusalem, Israeli War Cabinet member Benny Gantz said there was progress on a new deal to release hostages held by Hamas amid talks conducted by the US, Egypt and Qatar. The Israeli army says it's also stepped up operations in Khan Yunis, a city just north of Rafah. Israeli officials released a report on Wednesday that states the October 7th attack by Hamas on southern Israel involved systematic and deliberate sexual assaults on civilians. The 35-page report describes multiple accounts of sexual violence against women, children and men. It was presented to the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict last month. The report is the first comprehensive survey on the gender-based abuses carried out during the Hamas attack. Sarah Coates joins us with more from Tel Aviv. Sarah, what does this Israeli report say?
Hello there, Stuart. Well, this was compiled and published by the Association of Rape Crisis Centres in Israel. It has testimony from first responders, forensic experts, and also eyewitnesses, which claim that when Hamas militants entered Israel back on October 7, that they used extreme acts of sexual violence against victims and, in most cases, killed these people after the rape or sometimes even during. It didn't go on to say exactly how many cases of extreme sexual violence there were, but what it does say is that victims were women, men, and also children. Here is the director of that association speaking out about what else they found for that report.
What we learned, that this was an intentional way of behavior. In all of the crime scenes, in all the terrorist scenes that have happened, this systematic abuse, sadistic abuse, brutal abuse of women, children, and men happened. Something that I don't know if ever happened like this, ever in the world.
And Stuart, this report has been now given to the United Nations amid a lot of concern here. They certainly are. Potentially some movement on these talks. The War Cabinet member Benny Gantz, he came out to tell journalists last night that there are signs that indicate the possibility of moving forward on a deal. And this comes amid reports in Hebrew media that Israeli officials may be preparing a delegation to actually send for further talks in Paris tomorrow, Friday. This would include people like the Mossad chief, also the CIA director, Bill Burns, the Qatari Prime Minister, and the Egyptian spy chief. It is understood that Israeli officials are now watching these talks today in Cairo to actually see how they progress before making a firm decision on this. But it certainly comes amid a lot of protests here in Israel, especially after those comments yesterday from the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who said that bringing the hostages back is not the most important thing and that defeating Hamas is the most important thing. Also today, the US Mideast envoy Brett McGurk, he is expected to arrive here in Israel for talks with senior officials, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as the United States really tries to push Israel in accepting some deal, agreeing to some sort of deal with Hamas, and also putting pressure on Israel over this potential ground operation that is expected around the time of Ramadan, March 10. It's expected to begin on this ground operation in Rafah. Stuart.
After Russia achieved its first major territorial gain in more than 9 months, capturing the devastated eastern Ukrainian city of Avdiivka, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said he believes that Russian forces should make attempts to capture Kyiv after a failed attempt to seize the Ukrainian capital early in the war. In his latest interview, the senior Russian official also said Russians and Ukrainians are one nation and the Kyiv regime must fall.
Where do we stop? I don't know. I think taking into account what's been said, we still have a lot of serious work ahead. While it be Kyiv, yes, it could probably be Kyiv. If not now, then sometime later. There are two reasons for that. Kyiv is a Russian city and it poses a threat to the existence of the Russian Federation, an international threat. Kyiv, despite being a Russian city by its roots, is being controlled by an international gang of enemies of Russia, headed by the United States of America.
In Spain, thousands of farmers gathered in Madrid on Wednesday as part of ongoing protests against the European Union. Over 4,000 people held a rally outside the Agricultural Ministry headquarters in one of the biggest protests on this issue held in the Spanish capital. They highlighted the impact of EU agricultural policies, which have led to rising local production costs and the influx of Ukrainian agricultural goods. The French Prime Minister says agriculture must become a fundamental national interest in France. Gabriel Attal announced a new package of measures on February 21st to try to support the farming sector after recent protests and ahead of the major Paris agriculture show this weekend. DD India's Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
The French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal announced on Wednesday a new package of measures designed to try to ease the anger being felt by French farmers and also deal with the agricultural crisis in the country. Included in those measures, attempts to try to reduce the amount of paperwork that French farmers have to fill out when they want to try to employ foreign seasonal workers to pick fruit in the summer, for example. Also, the French government wants to speed up the payments that are due to France under the European Union's Common Agricultural Policy. And all of this is designed to try to deal with the protests that we've seen in France and the wider European Union by farmers blocking roads with tractors and trailers, for example, in demonstrations against red tape, cheap imports, high production costs and low salaries. All of this also in France comes into focus just 3 days before the Salon de l'Agriculture, that is one of the world's biggest agricultural shows, getting underway on Saturday here in Paris. Both the Prime Minister and the President are expected to attend, where they could come face to face with some of these angry farmers. In Paris, Ross Cullen reporting for DD India.
Italy will now be able to build a migrant processing centre on Albanian territory. 77 deputies in the 140-seat parliament voted in favour of the deal, announced in November. European Union member Italy will open 2 camps across the Adriatic Sea in Albania, which is not an EU member. Under the 5-year deal, up to 3,000 migrants would be able to take shelter at any given time. The agreement is part of the Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni's efforts to share the burden of addressing migration with other European countries. That's it from me here in London. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Stuart Smith joining us all from London. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. India's Prime Minister to shortly dedicate to the nation 2 largest indigenous pressurized heavy water reactors. And holy relics of Lord Buddha and his disciples reach Bangkok will be enshrined in the Royal Palace grounds by the Prime Minister of Thailand on Friday.
We're going to be talking about Panama-India relations, the importance of Panama in the region, and the outlook for Panama and for Latin America as they integrate deeper with India.
In today's world, Panama especially accepts and understands very well the centrality of India in the world. I think the cornerstone of our relation is common values. Panama is a lighthouse for democracy in Latin America, and India is the largest democracy in the world. The connectivity and the route that connects everyone and everything is the concept that could be already used by India.
Why is there so much buzz around Sora? Is it the future of video creation? If yes, is the world ready for it? Watch Connecting the Dots every Friday with me, at 8 p.m. IST on DD India. How exactly was the election in Pakistan rigged? Is there any hope for Pakistan's future?
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a visit to the western state of Gujarat. He attended the Golden Jubilee celebration of Gujarat Cooperative Milk Federation. India's Prime Minister also visited an exhibition. Over 1.25 lakh farmers witnessed the event at the Narendra Modi Stadium in Ahmedabad. Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation is a testimony of the resilience of cooperatives, their entrepreneurial spirit and strong determination of farmers, which has made Amul one of the strongest dairy brands in the world. Addressing the gathering on the growth of the Indian dairy sector, the Indian Prime Minister added that there has been 60% growth in milk production in the last decade.
अगर मैं पिछले 10 साल की बात करूं तो भारत में दूध उत्पादन में करीब 60% वृद्धि हुई है। पिछले 10 वर्षों में प्रति व्यक्ति दूध उपलब्धता भी करीब 40% बढ़ी है। दुनिया में डेयरी सेक्टर सिर्फ 2% की दर से आगे बढ़ रहा है, जबकि भारत में डेयरी सेक्टर 6% की दर से आगे बढ़ रहा है।
Later today, the Indian Prime Minister will dedicate to the nation two largest indigenous pressurized heavy water reactors. The new pressurized heavy water reactors were built at the Kakrapar Atomic Power Station Unit 3 and Unit 4, built by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited at a cost of over 22,500 crore rupees. Both the projects have cumulative capacity of 1400 megawatt. They are first of its kind reactors, and together these two reactors will produce about 10.4 billion units of clean electricity per year and benefit consumers of multiple states. For the first time, holy relics of Lord Buddha and his two chief disciples, Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, arrived from India at the National Museum in Bangkok on Thursday. The sacred antiquities were brought for a 26-day exposition on board an Indian Air Force aircraft. The relics were excavated at the Piprava village in India's Uttar Pradesh state. The holy artifacts will be featured across multiple venues in Thailand, where visitors will pay respects, starting the Buddhist festival Makha Bucha Day on 24th of February. Indian Union Minister Virendra Kumar said that the exchange would further strengthen bilateral ties between the two countries.
भारत सरकार ने महामहिम की वर्षगांठ के अति महत्वपूर्ण अवसर और हमारे दोनों देशों के बीच निकटता एवं भ्रातृत्व के संबंधों को दृष्टिगत रखते हुए थाईलैंड में इन पवित्र अवशेषों को भेजने का निर्णय लिया है। पवित्र अवशेषों के यहाँ पहुँचने से हम दोनों देशों के बीच मित्रता और प्रेम का यह बंधन और सुदृढ़ होगा।
And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. Thousands of trainee doctors in South Korea vowed to stay off the job in protest at government plans to increase medical school admissions to boost the healthcare sector. The emergency departments at 3 of South Korea's biggest hospitals were on red alert on Thursday. The South Korean government has warned the striking doctors to return to work immediately or face legal action. France's iconic Eiffel Tower remains closed for the fourth day following a workers' strike calling for a review of financial management by the Paris City Hall. The union warned that the closure could be extended as Paris City Hall refuses to negotiate. In a landmark decision, the Alabama Supreme Court has ruled that frozen embryos can be considered children and that they are entitled to the same legal rights as other unborn children. The decision was issued in response to the wrongful death suits brought against a fertility clinic in Alabama in 2021 after a patient broke into an IVF freezer and dropped a number of trays. Now, ski lovers rushed to the Yalnizkam ski resort in Turkey as snow depth reached 1.5 meters there. Locals and tourists enjoyed skiing and snowboarding on the ski track of 12 kilometers in the Turkish resort in the province of Aradan. Take a look. What a pleasure it must be to sail in those misty mountains. That's it in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.